The sun had just started to dip behind the oak trees that framed the back fence, casting long amber streaks across the rows of lavender I'd spent my afternoon trimming. I was still in my gardening gloves, fingertips caked with soil, when I heard the metallic thud at the end of the driveway. The mailbox. Probably another coupon booklet or a political flyer pretending to care. But when I opened the box, what I found was different. A thick, crisp envelope, heavy in my hands and too formal to ignore. My name, Mrs. Caroline Blake, was printed in a font I knew too well. It was the font lawyers used when they didn't want to sound human. I brought it inside, laid it next to the watering can on the kitchen counter, and peeled off my gloves with a slow, uneasy rhythm. Something in me had already guessed what it was. I opened it anyway. The letter was short, stiff, and precise. No warmth, no apology. Please do not attend the upcoming Blake family gathering. It's best we take some space for now. Signed, simply Jeremy. My son's name, carved into the white space like a blade. No love, no mom, just the clean, surgical distance of someone who had already closed the door and locked it. I stood there in the silence, letting the paper tremble just slightly in my hands. The kitchen, usually humming with the life of aging appliances and creaky floorboards, had gone unnaturally still. Even the clock seemed to tick slower. I reread the words. They didn't change. A breeze slipped in through the screen door and lifted the edge of the letter like it wanted to take it back. I pressed it flat with my palm and stared at the ink as if I could make it fade with enough focus. Then I reached for my phone. My thumb hovered over the screen for a few seconds longer than it needed to. I typed one word. Understood. No punctuation. I hit send. Outside, the garden hose still lay half-coiled near the hydrangeas. Forgotten. The water was running. A quiet, careless stream soaking into the gravel. I sat down at the kitchen table and looked at the letter one more time before folding it carefully and placing it back into the envelope. I had given him everything, and now I understood just how little that meant. By the time the sun had set, I was already thinking about the trust, the one his father and I had built slowly, dollar by dollar. After years of sacrifice, the morning Jeremy turned 6, we buried his father. I remember the way he held my hand at the cemetery, trying so hard not to cry, even though I was sobbing too hard to comfort him. He wore a tiny navy blazer that hung off his frame and kept glancing up at me like I was supposed to know what came next. I didn't, but I told him we'd figure it out together. A month later, I sold the house we bought before he was born, the one with the yellow door and the lemon tree out back. Too many memories clung to the walls like fog that wouldn't lift. We moved into a modest apartment in Savannah's south side. 2 bedrooms, thin walls, barely enough light, but it was ours. I worked mornings at the middle school as a para-educator and evenings at the county library. Summers, I tutored neighborhood kids and picked up shifts shelving books at the college store. My PhD slowly faded into the rear view, one deferred semester at a time until the university stopped writing. I remember the day the letter came. Jeremy was 10. He found it in the mail pile. "Are you going back to school, Mom?" he asked, holding it up with his bright, hopeful eyes. "Someday," I said, smiling, though I already knew I wouldn't. He was brilliant even back then. Built a functioning radio out of garage sale scraps. Entered science fairs with borrowed lab kits. When he got a partial scholarship to Columbia, I cried harder than I had at his father's funeral. We patched the rest together with grants, odd jobs, and private loans I should never have signed, but did anyway. I told myself it was an investment in his future, in our future. After college, Jeremy came home with big ideas and a business plan. "Just need some seed money," he said. "You believe in me, right?" I co-signed the first loan he couldn't qualify for. When the bank hesitated, I pulled from the small pension I'd been building. "It's just until we get traction," he promised. "You won't regret this." I didn't. Not then. When he called to say he'd secured funding for his startup, Atlas Edge, a tech firm I barely understood, I was standing at the sink, rinsing out mason jars. "We're official," he said, breathless. "You're gonna be proud of me." I told him I already was. The years blurred. The calls slowed. Eventually, they stopped being about sharing news and became mostly requests. "Could I co-sign this? Could I list your name on the lease?" Always temporary, always urgent, always with a promise. "Just for now. Mom, you're the only one I trust." When he got married, I flew out to San Diego. Lydia's family filled the first 3 rows. I sat near the back. No one asked me to pose for photos. I didn't ask either, but I never missed a birthday, never missed a transfer when payroll ran short, never missed a chance to believe in him. And then came yesterday's letter. No warning, no call, just a clean dismissal, signed and sealed like a contract ending. That night, I brewed a pot of coffee and pulled out the old file from the bottom drawer, legal documents, property records. The trust paperwork I hadn't looked at in nearly a decade, it was all still there. The trust Daniel had built for Jeremy before cancer took him. $4 million in proceeds from the sale of our family home, preserved in a long-term account I had quietly protected. Jeremy never knew the full amount. I never told him because I wanted him to earn his wings, not inherit them. But when Atlas Edge took off and I thought he was finally stable, I revealed the trust. He called me thoughtful. I called it love. I remember that too. But now I was remembering something else. A single sentence printed in clinical type, asking me not to come, not to be seen, not to belong. That was when I made the decision. I wasn't going to be erased in silence. Not anymore. The morning sun slipped through the slats of the kitchen blinds, casting striped shadows across the table where the trust documents lay open beside my coffee. I hadn't slept much, and I didn't need to. Clarity had a way of replacing rest. By the time the town began to stir, I was already dressed, my hair pinned neatly back, car keys in hand. I called Elliot around 8:15. He still kept his office in the converted carriage house just off Montgomery Street, tucked behind a law firm that had changed names 3 times in 10 years. He answered on the second ring, voice calm as ever. "Caroline," he said, like he'd been expecting me. "Can you come by?" I asked. Now, he didn't hesitate. Of course, the building hadn't changed. The same brass doorknob, the same creaky steps, the same faint scent of dust and lemon oil that wrapped around you like a wool coat in winter. I hadn't been there since Jeremy was still in middle school, but the second I walked in, it felt like opening a time capsule of a life I'd almost forgotten I'd lived. Elliot looked up from his desk and offered me the same patient smile he'd given the first time Daniel and I sat in this office, choosing guardians in case the worst happened. That was 28 years ago, and now I was here, alone. I handed him the envelope with Jeremy's letter without a word. He read it silently, his expression unreadable. When he finally looked up, he asked gently, "You're sure?" I nodded once. "I want him removed from the trust, effective immediately." He didn't blink. "Do you have a new beneficiary in mind?" I reached into my purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper, handing it across the desk like a secret I'd held too long. "Jade Taylor," I said. "She's 19, lives 2 blocks from me. Her mother passed last year. Overdose. Jade's been raising her 2 little brothers ever since. She was accepted into Georgia State but deferred. No one else could care for the kids." I hesitated, then added, "She brings me groceries when she knows I'm sick, calls me ma'am even when I ask her not to. And when I told her I was proud of her, she cried like it was the first time she'd heard it." Elliot took a long moment before nodding. "I'll draft the paperwork now." What followed was an hour of quiet rustling pages and purposeful pen strokes. The original trust had been built with a kind of optimism I hadn't felt in years. But as I signed each revision, name by name, clause by clause, I didn't feel grief. I felt something else, something cleaner, like sewing shut a wound that had been left gaping far too long. When we finished, Elliot leaned back, hands clasped gently. "He'll be formally notified by the end of business tomorrow." I stood to leave but paused. This trust was meant for someone who understood sacrifice. That's not Jeremy anymore. He didn't argue. He didn't need to. That evening, I roasted a small chicken and turned my phone to silent. I ate alone at the table, a candle burning low beside a plate of steamed carrots and wild rice. It was the first meal in years that didn't feel rushed or interrupted. No screens, no emails, just quiet. The kind that comes when you finally stop waiting to be chosen. By morning, the storm had begun. My phone started buzzing at 8:02 a.m. A call from Jeremy, then another, then Lydia, then a string of unknown numbers I didn't need to guess at. Attorneys, probably PR managers, maybe. I let it all ring. At 10:14 a.m., I'd counted 23 missed calls. By noon, 41. I placed the phone face down and took my tea out to the garden, where the petunias were beginning to bloom and the hummingbirds returned without fail. Ruth, my neighbor of 12 years, walked over through the side gate holding a mason jar of sweet tea. She didn't ask questions, just handed it to me and said, "You look like you're doing something important." I smiled and raised the glass. Finally, by late afternoon, a courier arrived with a thick envelope. Formal notice from Jeremy's legal team requesting an urgent reconsideration of recent changes to the Blake family trust. I set it unopened on the counter next to the napkin holder and went back outside. The blueberry bushes were thirsty and the soil was dry. I knelt down with my gloves and worked it loose by hand, gently, with care. My knees ached, but the ache felt honest, like I'd earned it. Later that night, I opened my laptop in the guest bedroom. 67 unread emails, subject lines like "Call me," "We need to talk," and "You're jeopardizing everything." One was in all caps, "Urgent action required." I opened none of them, just marked each one as read, selected all, and archived. The silence I felt afterward was the kind you don't notice until you realize how loud your life has been. The next morning, Jeremy showed up on my porch. He didn't call first, just appeared at 8:46, unannounced, in a sport coat entirely too formal for Savannah heat. He knocked 3 times, sharp, businesslike. When I opened the door, he didn't smile, didn't ask if he could come in. He just stepped inside like he still lived there. I said nothing and followed him to the kitchen. He stood by the same table where he used to do homework, legs too short to reach the floor. Now, he stood tall, practiced, calculating. "This trust," he started. "You had no right to change it without telling me first." "I had every right," I said, evenly. "This impacts everything," he snapped. "Our image, our momentum." Lydia's parents are furious. "We're closing on Series C funding next month. Do you understand how unstable this makes us look?" "You didn't send me an invitation to the reunion," I replied. He blinked. "What? You didn't invite me. Not to the reunion. Not to anything. You didn't even pretend." That's all I needed to know. He sighed. One of those long, exaggerated breaths that says this is all beneath him. That was a mistake, a clerical error. Don't throw everything away over that. Was I invited? Jeremy. Silence. I didn't think so. He tried again, now pushing. "We can fix this. Say you were sick. Issue a statement. Reverse the transfer and keep things clean. Nobody has to know. I'm not interested in pretending." I said, "This isn't about pretending. It's about protecting the family." I stood up slowly, steady. "You stopped being family the moment I became your backup plan instead of your mother." His jaw tightened, the same way it used to when I told him no as a child. But now he wasn't asking for candy or extra screen time. He was asking me to erase myself again. When he left, he didn't say thank you, didn't apologize, just muttered, "We'll see what our lawyers say," and walked out. I watched from the porch until his rental car disappeared down the street. That night, Elliot called. His voice was quiet, lower than usual. "Caroline," he said, "there's something you need to know, and I didn't want you to hear it from anyone else." I sat down. "He told me 3 weeks ago. Jeremy had submitted paperwork attempting to use the trust as collateral for a private lending deal, without notifying me, without authorization. A shell company, based out of Nevada, no transparency, no oversight, and no guarantee that any of it was real. If we hadn't processed the reassignment in time, Elliot said, you could have been on the hook for millions. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just let the cold, clear truth settle where my trust had been. He hadn't just left me out. He'd gambled with me, in silence, and he would have done it again. The next morning came like any other, sunlight glancing off the stovetop and the smell of coffee lingering in the air. But something was different. I felt taller in my own kitchen, not proud, not even angry, just done. I opened the manila envelope that Jeremy's lawyer had sent. Read every line of legalese about breach of implied trust, potential reputational damage, and reconsideration of beneficiary rights. It was all dressed up as concern. Of course, phrases like family unity and preserving legacy repeated like a spell they thought I'd fall under. But I'd already woken up. I didn't respond. I folded the letter in half, slid it into the drawer where I keep old receipts and expired coupons, and made myself oatmeal. Around 9:30, I got a text from Jade. It just said, got off work early. Want to meet? I replied, meet me at Coastal Federal. Wear something that makes you feel brave. She showed up wearing that old green hoodie I'd seen her wear through all of last winter. Her shoulders hunched a little as we walked into the bank, like she still wasn't sure she belonged. I told her she did. The banker, a woman named Carla, walked us through the paperwork slowly, with a kind of grace I hadn't expected. We set up the account in Jade's name, tied to the trust. Tuition, books, housing. Funds were restricted to needs only, but the security was real. She didn't say much until it was all signed. Then, outside the glass doors, she turned to me with tears pooled but not falling. No one's ever done something like this for me, she whispered. Not once. I smiled, touched her shoulder gently. You earned it. I'm just the witness. That night, I pulled down the cedar box from the hallway closet. Inside were pieces of a life that felt like someone else's now. A napkin with Daniel's handwriting, a pressed daisy from our honeymoon in Tennessee, and at the bottom, a framed photo Jeremy, maybe 8 years old, holding up a paper trophy he made from construction paper. The crayon writing said, "Best mom ever." I sat at the edge of the couch with that photo in my hands for a long time. I still love you, I whispered, but I love myself now, too. The days that followed were quiet but full. I started volunteering twice a week at the neighborhood community center, Tuesdays and Thursdays. I brought snacks and copies of loan agreements, taught 6 young women how to read financial terms, avoid predatory lending, and open checking accounts they could control. We laughed sometimes. They were slow to trust, but they kept showing up. That was enough. Back at home, the voicemails kept piling up. I didn't listen to them. I didn't need to. I could hear Jeremy's voice in my head already, some combination of panic, hurt, and carefully measured indignation. Lydia's would be sharp, probably curt. The lawyers would be calm and threatening, but none of them mattered anymore. Ruth came by every couple of days with tea or pie or just a long look that said, "You okay?" And I'd nod, because I was. One afternoon, while I was weeding the back garden, she brought over a pitcher of lemonade and set it down next to the begonias. "They're still trying to reach you, you know." I wiped the sweat from my brow and took a long sip. "They'll run out of energy before I do." She smiled. "You're steady, Caroline." I shrugged. "I've had practice." That night, I heard tires on the gravel. It was after sunset, the kind of hour where everything softens. I peeked through the blinds, and there he was, Jeremy, standing on the porch in another suit, hair perfectly styled, like an ad for a man who wanted to look like he had everything under control. The knock was firm, measured. I opened the door without a word and stepped aside. He walked in like he still remembered every inch of the house, like it was his, like nothing had changed. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table. Same one where he used to eat peanut butter sandwiches and quiz me on spelling words. But there was no child left in the man who sat across from me now. "You blindsided me," he said. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I do," I said calmly. I stopped enabling a cycle. His jaw tensed. "You don't understand what kind of pressure we're under. Lydia's parents are coordinating with legacy investors. We're on the verge of a brand expansion. This makes us look weak." "No," I replied. "This makes me look awake." His hands pressed together like he was about to pray. "We can issue a correction. Say it was temporary. Say there was a medical issue. Anything. Just reverse it. Quietly. Nobody needs to know." "Jeremy," I said, leaning forward. "I'm not protecting an image anymore. I'm protecting myself." His voice rose. "This isn't just about you. This is about what we've built. You built something that excluded me," I said, "not just at the reunion. For years, I was good enough to co-sign loans, but not good enough to stand next to in a photograph." He was silent, but I saw the math happening behind his eyes. Damage control. Optics. His next move. "I told you once," I added. "This trust was meant for someone who understood sacrifice. Someone who didn't need to be reminded what loyalty looked like." He shook his head. "You think this is loyalty? To just abandon your son?" I stood. "You abandoned me long before I reclaimed what was mine." He stood, too, angrier now, flushed. "This isn't over." "I know," I said softly, "but your control over it is—" He left without a hug, without a backward glance, and for the first time in my life, I didn't wait at the window to watch him drive away. The morning after Jeremy left, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel broken, either. I felt still, as if something inside me had finally stopped spinning. The storm had passed, but not in the way I once imagined storms would. No damage, no debris, just quiet. I made myself breakfast, eggs, toast, half a grapefruit, and ate slowly by the window while the sky stretched open in soft pinks and golds. My phone stayed off, turned face down on the entryway table. It had been off for 3 days. I had no plans to turn it on. Around mid-morning, the courier came again. Another manila envelope. This one was heavier, the kind printed on expensive paper stock to make the sender feel powerful. I opened it in silence, more curious than concerned. Inside was a formal letter from Jeremy's legal team, urging a reversal of the trust reassignment. It spoke in tones of gravity and consequence, reputational harm, loss of investor confidence, long-term brand erosion, as if love could be branded, as if motherhood came with a PR strategy. I placed the letter back in the envelope, slid it into the drawer beneath the microwave, and returned to the garden. The blueberry bushes were coming in fuller this year. Despite the heat, I watered slowly, loosened the dry soil with gloved fingers, and leaned into the rhythm of tending something that couldn't ask or betray. Midway through the row, Ruth leaned over the fence with a glass of sweet tea. "They're still calling," she asked, though she already knew. "They'll run out of breath before I do," I said. She handed me the glass and smiled. "You always were a quiet kind of strong." That evening, I sat on the porch and watched the sun spill amber across the brick path. The phone was still off. The kitchen was clean. My life, for the first time in years, wasn't tethered to anyone else's panic. The next day, I received a message from Jade. She wanted to meet again. This time, she suggested the diner on Beechwood Avenue. I arrived first and watched through the window as she came up the walk, still wearing that old green hoodie, sleeves pushed up, hair tied in a tight bun. She slid into the booth across from me and reached into her backpack. From it, she pulled a folded acceptance letter, Georgia State, fall semester, computer science. They let me defer again, just for one more term. The boys are both in school now. She said, "I've got a friend from church who'll help with after-school pickup." I nodded, letting the pride fill my chest without crowding the moment. "I'm glad," I said. "You deserve this." She looked down, then up again. "You believed in me before I even knew how to believe in myself." I reached across the table, gently resting my hand over hers. That's all we need sometimes. Just one person who sees us. When I got home that afternoon, I pulled out an old cedar box from the hall closet. Inside, beneath a yellowed newspaper clipping and an old keychain Jeremy made in 3rd grade, was a photograph I hadn't touched in years. Me and Daniel, arms wrapped around each other, standing in front of the lemon tree we planted after Jeremy was born. I ran my thumb along the edge of the frame. They were both gone now, in different ways. But I was still here, and maybe that was the most radical thing of all. That week, I started teaching a new financial literacy workshop at the community center. Our group had grown, 9 women now, 1 teenage boy who tagged along with his aunt. I brought printouts of sample leases, paycheck stubs, credit reports. I explained APRs in plain English. I brought coffee and snacks, sometimes muffins if I was feeling ambitious. The room was warm, filled with laughter, eye rolls, hard questions. It felt right. Putting something into the world that couldn't be undone by silence or withdrawal, something that didn't require a bloodline to hold meaning. That Friday night, I lit a candle in the kitchen and made chicken and rice for one. After dinner, I turned on the porch light and stepped outside with a cup of chamomile tea. The air was soft, the kind that only settles when you've finally stopped proving yourself. A neighbor walked by with her dog and waved. I waved back. The street was quiet, not empty, just peaceful. The next morning, a certified letter arrived from Jeremy's attorney. It sat unopened on the counter until sunset. I didn't need to read it. I already knew what it would say. Legal consequences veiled as concern, requests disguised as reason, but none of it mattered anymore. I folded the envelope once, without opening it, and slid it into the back of the kitchen drawer beneath the junk mail and expired coupons. By dusk, I was packing a small suitcase. Just a few days, I told myself. Not to escape, to reclaim. I left before sunrise. The town still tucked in sleep. The road was long and familiar, lined with pine and soft fog. I didn't blast music or fill the silence. I let the quiet ride with me. I wasn't running. I was returning to myself. I stopped at a roadside fruit stand, bought a basket of peaches and a jar of honey. The woman behind the counter called me sweetheart and asked if I needed anything else. I smiled and said, "No, I have everything I need." Later that afternoon, I pulled off the highway to a rest stop, stretched my legs, and sat at a picnic table beneath a cottonwood tree. A few kids were chasing each other through the grass, their laughter echoing through the still air. I pulled out my journal, the one I hadn't written in for years, and began a new page. Today I chose myself without apology. I thought of Jeremy then and didn't flinch. I thought of Lydia's voice on speakerphone, of the meetings I wasn't invited to, of the photo frames I wasn't in. But I also thought of Jade, of Ruth's steady hand, of the blueberry bushes I'd planted, of the women around that folding table every Tuesday, holding clipboards and asking, finally, wait, what does that clause actually mean? Sometimes love looks like sacrifice. Sometimes it looks like silence. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it looks like walking away for good. I had spent decades building bridges that only led one way. And when I stopped walking across them, I found something I hadn't expected, ground that held. If you've ever had to walk away from someone you gave everything to, I hope you know you are not alone. I'll be reading your stories, every single one.